we take it for granted, that we're treating everyone the same. But we always remember that treating people this treating and support, in essence, engaging in interactions with our own children or other people's children, there's always implicit levels of support that's there, right? But when you recognize in interactions between people who are different as a function of race, there are different levels of support. In fact, there's an absence of support for some. And then we take support, at a maximized level, i.e., experienced as privileged for others, without acknowledging that, in fact, that occurs. And the major point that I try to make in this book, as facilitated by the theoretical framework that drives my work and my ways of thinking, is that all humans are vulnerable. Bottom line, if you breathe, you're vulnerable. You have risks. You have that are a part of the human experience, and there are also supports that offset the risk, and therefore together define the level of vulnerability that you're operating from as you're dealing with expected human tasks across the life course. Except there are differences in risks that are confronted and supports that are available, right? But if you don't recognize that, and people don't are not on the same level of vulnerability, because some have lots of risks that are not even acknowledged, and then others have lots of privileges and therefore and also fewer risks. But we're looking at outcomes, and that's where the social sciences come into play here, because social science too often look at outcomes, right? They compare outcomes by demographics, be it gender, be it race, be it social class, whatever. They look at and compare outcomes. And when comparing outcomes and reporting on outcomes, they inadvertently, perhaps, they reinforce stereotypes of some people who therefore are viewed as less because of those outcomes, and others are assumed to be better. So this hierarchical way of thinking is also a part of the problem of risk construction, right? Because you're having to deal with stereotypes all the time if you're a member of a group that is high on risks and low on resources and supports, if you're following me. So that
Yeah.
sort of human development perspective has very often not been in the mix when it comes to people of color. And sure as heck, in terms of the context, we've ignored 350 years of traditions of functioning like this. So in 1954, what the Supremes intended to do, I'm sure, relative to the remedy, given the ignoring of 350 years of structured high risk conditions and inadequate or no supports, they generated a remedy that was inadequate to the risks and challenges that a people had endured for 350 years, and for whom the outcomes of experiences were only viewed as outcomes and not viewed as, if you will, mechanisms, human mechanisms. And there lies the problem in terms of 70 years later, we are in many ways in a worse situation. But there are demonstrations of resilience, both for people of color, in terms of the strategies that were helpful for survival. At the same time, there are whites who have not defined themselves by their privilege.
Right.
And so that some supports have been helpful to whites to not, if you will, buy into and assume colorblind positionality, but have been able to deal with socialization experiences in a way that acknowledges the humanity of different others. At the same time, those who have been burdened mainly with risks without policies acknowledging or taking into account those supports that have mattered, like Black teachers and administrators, right? A Black decent housing, etc. Those were not supports that were adequately integrated into organized remedies that were supposedly designed to be helpful for everyone. They were helpful to whites, but they were not helpful to blacks because the risks were so much greater. So if you think about it like a seesaw, when one side goes up, and you don't have enough weight, the other side goes down and stays down. And so there's this for vulnerability, this sort of balance and imbalance opportunity between risks and protective factors. And whites have enjoyed mainly protectives and therefore supports. And of course, at the same side, minorities have just experienced a lot of risk factors. But in terms of what happens just across the life course at different phases, you basically measure outcomes for these different developmental tasks that all humans have to engage in, from birth through the preschool years, through childhood, and then through adolescence, and of course for the adulthood years as well. You look at those stage specific outcomes and you make comparisons, and you never talk about the differentials here in terms of protective factors for some and high risk for others. The Brown decision was of that ilk. It was not adequate, given the 350 years of lack of supports that were equal to the high risk conditions, which was the experience of blacks in this country for 350 years.